our webinar today. So yeah, I suppose let's kickstart and get ourselves going. So I'm Niamh Keogh. I am Principal Product Manager here at Scurry. I'm thrilled to be hosting today's webinar. So today we are going to be jumping into the topic of fulfilling on the delivery promise and all that entails. So everything from setting attractive delivery promises to customers at the checkout to get them to actually purchase with us, to actually making sure how do we fulfill that and get those parcels into the customers in that time frame. And not only that, but then how do we take that model and scale that across Europe and throughout peak trading periods. So to deep dive on this, I'm delighted to be joined here today by John Beasley, who's Director of Logistics at Bulk. So John has a wealth of experience in this and has done it in bulk to great success. So looking forward to pulling on some of his expertise and some of his experience over the next kind of 30 minutes. So welcome, John. Thank you very much for joining us.
No, thanks for inviting us. I'll probably do a quick little introduction for those people that aren't aware of Bulk. So Bulk make the best nutrition you can buy in the UK and Europe. We are roughly £160 million business, growing somewhere between 15 to 20% each year. Profitable, founder owned and led still. So our CEO is the founder. And from an operational perspective, I look after all end-to-end logistics. So that's from freight, air, road into our facilities. Our 3 facilities, 2 of them are in-house operations, one based in Poland, one based in Colchester. And then we also have a 3rd fully automated facility in the sort of Midlands of the UK that fulfills all of our UK demand. Equally, as part of that remit, to look after our carrier operations, and we have these days a multi-carrier strategy across the UK and Europe, delivering to probably 20 plus countries at the moment. And in terms of scale, we probably ship about 3 million parcels a year. So yeah, some quite reasonable scale go along with that. And in terms of my background before this, always e-com, always logistics. I've worked at the likes of John Lewis, ASOS, Ocado, Farfetch, and also a brief time in 3PL as well. So logistics, e-com through and through.
So you've got a very good wide variety of experience that you can shed on today's discussions. But look, thanks a million for giving the overview. I think it's always good to understand where you're coming from and kind of how your operational model works.
Yeah.
So maybe starting off, I suppose, maybe starting at the beginning and that delivery promise. So obviously consumer expectation drives a lot of what we're doing, and it's constantly evolving, right? So there are needs around time, cost, convenience, age-old challenge, I guess, but one that is very much a challenge for retailers. So kind of how does the delivery promise play a part in Bulk's strategy? And what are some of the biggest challenges that go along with meeting that?
We probably think about the delivery promise in 2 ways. So the first way is how do we manage the customer's expectations? And then the second way is around like how do we keep that promise that we've set to customers? So in order to be able to manage the customer expectations, like it's foundational that you actually understand your end-to-end lead times. From the moment a customer places an order on your website, it goes through your upstream systems, through your ERP, down to your WMS, picked and packed, and then shipped across the UK, Europe, and presented to the customer, hopefully at their doorstep with no issues. It's also really key that you understand, the complexities within that. So, weekend deliveries, Sunday deliveries. So, for example, you pick and pack an order on Friday. It's unlikely to get delivered necessarily by Saturday or Sunday unless you pay for like kind of premium services. Equally, when you start delivering across a wide continent like Europe, you have to start understanding around postcodes and different geographies. So, all of that in play and understanding that deeply then allows you to have a sense of like, well, what kind of lead times and service can we present to customers in France, or could we present to customers in Germany? And when you look at the data, you typically see like a distribution. So like metropolitan areas, you'll get there pretty quick. And then outer areas, you'll get there a little bit slower, especially like mountainous regions, for example, in Europe. So then you have to think about, well, what am I going to tell the customer? Because if you want to capture every single customer across that distribution, you'll end up
Mhm.
presenting a really big, wide delivery promise of, let's say, I don't know, 7 days to Germany, or which actually would probably affect your conversion on the website. So you need to think
Yeah.
about actually 95% of my customers, based on the distribution, are getting it within 3 days. That's what I'm going to present to the customers, knowing that 5%, for whatever reason, down to geography or exceptions, are unlikely to fulfill. So once you kind of have that well understood, it's about communicating it to the customer. So typically bulk, we do broad SLA communication at a website level. So you go to an Italian website, you'll see the Italian proposition
Mhm.
presented pretty clearly. But what we've also done, which is pretty cool, is as you progress through the shopping experience and you get to our checkout and you put your Italian postcode, we have an AI model that sits in the background that analyzes our real time transit times of our parcels, and will present like a bespoke expectation to that customer based on that postcode, which
Mhm.
often is better than what we're presenting like globally across the website, because we could be more nuanced if you live in like a metropolitan area. And then once the customer places the order, it's about making sure the post-purchase comms is really tight. So
Mhm.
either, you know, in those emails, you can typically give them an expectation of when a parcel's going to arrive, and as it progresses through the supply chain, you can advise them about that. Um, but like equally your carriers as well, it's probably worth checking what emails your carriers are sending to your customers, because sometimes they can tell your customers slightly different things than what you've told them, and that can be a problem with managing expectations.
Yeah.
But that proactive comms is super important, and then really, if something does go wrong in a reactive space, you need to manage the customer expectations around a delivery promise. So if a trailer breakdown, if your warehouse has issues, if there's just a lot of strikes at the moment, for example, there's a shipping strike in Greece, so parcels moving around Greece and the various islands are currently all being impacted, and being able to proactively message customers that, manage their expectations, even if it's different from what you originally said on the website. Super important to, one, generate trust, but two, to stop contacts coming into your contact center, just soaking up resource, and yeah, it is an important part for a retailer. And I think the biggest challenge to making all of this work and all that expectation setting is data. So
Mhm.
data is kind of foundational, and at Bulk, we've spent a lot of time taking data from Magento, which is our front end application that controls the website, our ERP, our WMSs, and we have three WMSs, our CMS, which is Scurry in this case, knitting all that data together so we have a holistic view of the customer journey and our progress executing on those expectations. Why that's really important is it lets us pin down where we're going wrong if we're
Yeah.
going wrong. So if we do see, for example, you know, really high lost in transits, rates are high, we can see that in the data. If you see internal issues like the ERP and the WMS aren't talking to each other properly, which for a growing, medium-sized business like us that doesn't have necessarily all the super slick systems as a big player, we have to keep an eye on our system integrity. But equally, like your 3PL might be sending you a spreadsheet saying we've shipped everything on time, but you need to be able to check that independently with independent data.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's all about managing expectations. So understand what your real lead times are. Make sure you communicate that really clear with the customer, and have data underneath it to allow you to assess, yeah, your operational environment.
Amazing. So yeah, you've given us loads there, which is great. So maybe just to jump in. So you mentioned having that kind of more personalized time frame that you're giving your customer. How effective is that? So you said kind of that blanket 7 days to get a shipment somewhere. Obviously,
Mhm.
that can, it's a very competitive market, particularly yourselves and especially across Europe. So,
Mm.
how much can delivery be that competitive advantage? So, when customers are shopping for particular items, when they're looking at the checkout and seeing kind of how long is this going to take me, how important is that to try and make that as competitive as possible? Or like, how effective have you seen that change in being able to be more specific based on postcode?
I think it's different for different industries and different
Yeah.
retailers. So if you're product led and you've got an amazing creative product that you can only get from you, you're probably less sensitive to it. But
Hmm.
the market we operate in, which is relatively commoditized, although our products are the best, so
They
just
are.
put that out
Yeah.
there. Price and delivery expectations are like a key factor if you can
Yeah.
buy a kilo of protein from like two or three other retailers. And we don't have, let's say, lots of good data on how uh, delivery expectations translates to conversions on the website, and it's something we are sort of starting to look at with like A/B testing.
Yeah.
But we're sort of intuitively assuming that we offer a customer in Italy like a 5-day window, but
Mm.
instead we could offer them a 2-day window if they live in Bologna. Then that's got to be a good thing. And
Yeah.
if we could find a way of communicating that 2-day earlier in the shopping journey, like for example, when they've just clicked some protein, by the way, you live here because you've logged in already and it's two
Mm.
days, I think that's really compelling. And one of the things we are actively exploring for maybe launch towards the end of the year is, express carrier options. So, like, what would happen if we introduce some really fast carriers that obviously come
Hmm.
with a higher cost profile? Is there a
Yeah.
demographic of customers that are willing to pay that? And we see it in the UK because in the UK, around 20% of our customers pick next day delivery, which is a little bit more
Right. Okay.
expensive. So we think there's a market for it. But yeah, setting expectations really tight probably improves conversion. Delivering parcels quickly to customers, good. Probably not the whole story though.
Mm. So I suppose you're in control of part of that. So you mentioned it's really understanding what your lead times are, so how long it takes you to process a shipment. Then there's the part where obviously you hand that package over to a third party to deliver that for you. So how do you ensure that the partners that you're working, how you gain that trust with those partners, or how do you maintain as much control over that, I suppose, as you can?
So any partner that we use, we definitely
Mm.
go through a testing period.
Right.
So
Okay.
we will send test parcels through their network multiple different times, weekday, weekend, to get actual physical data to validate, the presentations and the uh, expectations they've set with us. Assuming they pass that hurdle, we then typically go into a bit of a nursery hypercare phase where like every day
Yeah.
we're checking everything to make sure the service is high. And we can speak to that as we just launched a new carrier in the Nordics, in Norway and Sweden, and we've just gone with Post Nord, and they've just come out of their hypercare phase where we're tracking every single parcel at line level to make sure that service is as good as we believe it will be for our customers. And as you move into that more BAU phase,
Mm.
it's standard operations. You create routines that look at data. The teams then take action off that data and you repeat, and you do that every day. So every day in bulk, the operations team will look at all the carrier data and we'll check things like have certain parcels been scanned into the hub when they
Yeah.
were expected to be hub. They will check for anomalies around lead times, and from the data that comes out on a weekly basis, they'll review that as well. So we build in all those routines, all those checkpoints, and we look at the data. Even when the data is good, fine,
Yeah.
we'll look at it again next week to ensure that when it isn't fine, we're taking corrective action with our partners.
Very good. So yeah, so you're kind of you'll settle in on kind of understanding kind of that 95% of shipments are kind of hitting a particular time frame for you that's setting that delivery promise and kind of monitoring based on
Yeah,
that.
we weekly we'll look at every single parcel. We've created like OTIF based metrics that will
Mm.
say, for example, for Germany, what percentage of customers got their parcel as per our delivery expectation, take into account like weekend complexity, or if it's summer German driving bans, taking into account all of that. And we use that as our sort of operational true north, coupled with
Yeah.
some more like qualitative data. So, for example, Trustpilot.
Yeah.
definitely starting to leverage that a lot more, and understanding what customers are saying, specifically often about like the doorstop delivery process and how that is working, because that's
Yeah.
sometimes trickier to see in the data. Like, how many times has your last mile provider actually attempted to deliver? Where is the nearest locker that they then diverted it to?
Mhm.
Was the two delivery temps done within half an hour of each other? So it looks like they've been a little bit naughty and just fudged it. That is
Yeah.
hard to see en masse looking at the data.
Yes.
And that's where Trustpilot can typically give you some interesting insights.
Yes, in context. So do you find that with Trustpilot, so obviously people can be quite forthcoming when something doesn't quite go right. So that's where you really get the stories of maybe where things don't happen. So it's taking that type of feedback and I suppose blending it with your data set to try and give a fuller picture of the
Yeah,
experience that customers are receiving.
you've got to steel yourself for a bit because it's all the news you don't want to see. But
Of course.
um, yeah, there is good stuff in it. And so, for example, like we've recently upgraded one of our lanes to rather than one delivery attempt and then diverted to a locker, we've gone to two delivery attempts before diverting to a locker. And we've done
Wow.
that because we've understood from the feedback that that last mile delivery stop process is one of the points of friction and one of the points that keeps coming up. Like, I wasn't in for my delivery, the lockers are too far away. This
Mhm.
isn't great. So we've changed that process based on that feedback. So hopefully, and it has already started to kick in with some good CX metrics to improve that customer journey. Likewise, certain markets where we can see reported ish, we can see parcels going missing,
Mm.
and we can see that kind of through our loss in transit data, but equally through the verbatims. We're thinking about putting proof of delivery in, which is, a lot of companies use proof of delivery. It costs a bit more, so for a low margin business like ourselves, it requires some consideration. But that was kind of spurred on through looking at the verbatims, looking at the loss in transits, and going, we've got an issue here with that parcel handoff process, and we need to tighten it up. We can tighten it up by putting proof of delivery, so the customer has a pin, for example, and only they have a pin, and if that pin's been given to the carrier, we know that that parcel's been given to the right customer. And yeah, that's been spurned off looking at that data and understanding deeply our doorstop delivery process.
Amazing. Amazing. So obviously you've achieved incredible growth and especially across Europe. Um, so what are some of the main challenges that you face as you scale? So obviously you use quite a plethora of different carriers across
Mm.
different destinations and territories. So interesting to understand kind of when looking at a new territory, kind of what are some of the key considerations and how you set out about opening a new market
Well, all the markets, so when I joined 2 years ago, all the markets we're currently trading in were ones we were already
in.
trading in. But bulk's carrier strategy at that point was basically give everything to DHL, they take it to Germany, and then they sort it in Germany, and then it gets filtered out throughout the whole EU and
Yeah.
delivered to our customers. And the reason that was is when bulk was a bit smaller, it made sense from an efficiency perspective to have one truck go into Germany and leverage the wider DHL network and all the automation and all the sortation. There was definitely an opportunity when I joined to deploy, a direct injection strategy. So for our
Yeah.
top 5 markets, we were producing enough parcels where the economics made sense that we just sent a trailer directly to the local markets, injected those parcels into the last mile provider, and one, you cut out all of that time going to Germany and then getting routed to Spain. You cut out all of the handling, which is going to correlate with damages at some point. So you get faster speeds, and it's also if you've got the right volumes, much more cost efficient to do, and that saved quite an amount from a financial perspective, but also took about a day off some of our major lanes in terms of end-to-end lead time, and it sort of opened us up to being more commercially astute. So you're using like SCORY, for example,
Yeah.
we can pick what providers we want to use in each market based on that optimal mix of like good commercials, great service. We don't necessarily have to give everything to DHL. Don't get me
Hmm.
wrong, DHL are fantastic, and like we love working with them as a partner, and they really look after us. But they're not necessarily the strongest in absolutely every market on either a cost perspective or service perspective, although they are very good. So in some markets, we've been able to choose a different approach, and having Scurry's been an accelerator of that because we're not directly integrated with a carrier. Ultimately, if Scurry have the label, we
Hmm.
can do a bit of low code stuff in the background, print a couple of labels, test it with the carrier, and feasibly we got behind it, flip in a week. Technically you can flip quicker, but you'd want to test it operationally to make sure it all works. But and that's great leverage, especially when you come into negotiations. If a carrier knows you can flip quickly, you can be agile, you'll secure better rates, you can have rolling tender terms, and yeah, equally, if a carrier is not performing and you're out of contract or they breach the contract, you've got the ability to quickly like flip that back, and we've used that, and we've used it to influence our strategy now. So now we have a couple of either aggregators or dedicated carriers that we use,
Yeah.
and they're great in their respective markets, but they also compete with each other a bit. So when we do come for tender, they know that, for example, DHL have got these lanes, and Pro Carrier have got these lanes, and
Yeah.
that creates that competitive process when we speak to them both, because they know they might potentially lose the lanes if they don't bring their best game to that commercial discussion.
So you obviously mentioned that you use your data quite a lot for how, I suppose, each of those lanes are maybe performing, kind of down to the experience that's being provided within those territories. So obviously data plays a big part. So obviously competitor or your carrier partners having that your own set of data, I think you kind of mentioned was really important to be able to validate some of that piece. But then I
Mm-hmm.
suppose how do you take that data and use it to remain agile and to kind of tweak that experience that you're giving to customers. So as you become aware of kind of more nuanced um, experiences, maybe in particular postcode areas, how do you adapt to rectify some of that?
Um, so in terms of how we organize ourselves in bulk, we have like daily and weekly routines where we look at all the carrier metrics,
Yeah.
and that will give us a sense if there's like a top line issue and we can sort of take action. And for example, there's two issues we're actively managing now with two different lanes. But to really deeply understand a given market, like
Mhm.
the carrier team that I work with consists of a really capable guy called Will and Matt. There are only two people. There's loads of lanes, loads of data, so we have to kind of focus in on where we're going to really deep dive and understand the data.
Yeah.
And one area we've spent a lot, well, all our trust pilots for all European countries are all growing over the last 2 years, and it's been a great news story. One that's growing less quickly is our French trust pilot, and
Yeah.
French customers are notoriously difficult to please, especially in D2C space, a bit like Dutch customers. And those guys have done a great job analysing the data alongside our CX team. You know, whether it's data that's come from the carriers, whether it's our data that we've knitted together, whether it's Trustpilot, and they've also worked with the carriers really strongly. So rather than throw across some data and say like fix it, it's your problem, that's not
Yeah.
the right way of, or it's not, I would suggest, the right way of dealing with a carrier. We work really closely with Collie Privé, supported by Every, who are the overall aggregator for our
Yeah.
French lane. And we visited the hub, and actively sharing data, and we're meeting this week to go through all the actions. And if you work really closely with your carrier and you've got good data, it's actually amazing some of the changes you can make with them, whether it's changing their routing schedules internally. So
Yeah.
your parcel's arriving at 4 o'clock, but the outbound at that hub is leaving at 5 o'clock. Well, hours not enough to sort. Can you leave at 6 instead? And that's quite a big request to ask about hub. But if you've got a good relationship, you've got data, like they understand where you're coming from, and they're willing to make those sort of injection changes. And that's just like one example of
Yeah.
15 that we've done working to using the data to improve the experience.
Amazing. Um, So obviously, I suppose we're midway through October, fast approaching one of the
Yeah.
busiest trading periods for a lot of retailers. And actually, you've just had your own kind of mini bump. You were celebrating a big birthday the last couple of weeks and ran some very good offers. So had a good busy period. I actually put in an order myself after our last conversation, and I did. I got it. I got it in time. I got it in line with the delivery promise. So it was a
Fantastic.
very good experience. Um, but yeah, I suppose kind of thinking of peak and coming up to that. So there's one thing about having that in normal periods, but then when you go into periods where you're processing double, triple your normal volumes, how do
Yeah.
you keep that in line with the delivery promise? Do you do anything to amend that delivery promise, or how do you scale operations to make sure that you keep meeting that mark for customers?
So that's relatively tried and tested in the sense
Mhm.
that we understand our capacities in the warehouse and we share our capacity requirements with the carriers. So we know when we will breach those
Yeah,
and where our pick and pack capacity across our facilities isn't sufficient or the carriers are not able to pull the volume or we're going to fill up trailers quicker than they can arrive.
yeah.
And working along with our CX team, we will adjust ahead of time the proposition to customers. And what we
Hmm.
typically find for Black Friday, customers are quite forgiving about adding a day here or a day to the proposition because they know they're getting a great deal and it's not really a an immediate purchase.
Yeah,
Um, that said, in the UK for this peak we just went through, which we call our bulk birthday, which is a bit like Amazon Prime. It's a proprietary sales event we have where we offer some of the best discounts through the year that we do,
mm.
up to 80% off. So I hope you got a good deal.
That's it. I did. I availed. I put plenty in the basket.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
a good while now. Yeah,
And for that period, we tried something a little bit different. So using Scurry, we were able to upgrade a lot of our standards to next days. So our typical proposition is 2 to 3 days standard.
hmm.
And by upgrading all our volume to the next day, if we did get behind in the warehouse, that gave us an extra day to play with from a service perspective because we knew the
Yeah,
carrier would then catch it up with the next day proposition. So by using Scurry, we were able to orchestrate the warehouse and the carrier differently to protect
yeah,
the end-to-end customer with the carrier catching back up delays in the warehouse. And it was delays more because the capacity just outstripped, the demand, not necessarily because there were issues. And we'll probably look to employ a similar. Well, we will employ a similar strategy during Black Friday. We'll
yeah.
play with the propositions using Scurry to balance out the demand across the supply chain.
And is that then, sorry, is that using, say, like the rules engine then to be able to kind of easily adapt or change? So depending
Yeah,
on how
exactly.
the operator of the day quickly jump in, change
Exactly.
the
So
volume for the week.
Carrie Annis and our team will go in, change all standards the next days. The warehouse believe it's a standard, treat it as a standard, but as soon as it hits the carrier network, it's the next day.
Yeah,
And so the warehouse are, for example, a day behind because they've had massive volumes and typically they're shipping same day. The carrier network now will catch that up because it's going to deliver like one day, and that's a
yeah.
great lever we've got. For example, in the UK, and maybe next year we'll have that in the EU as well when we deploy a few more express carriers into our mix.
Yeah, you'll have a little bit more flexibility for how you can pull both those levers. Amazing.
Yeah.
I actually can't believe the time. Fast gone. But
Cool.
you were mentioning, so you've just kind of done your lessons learned around peak. So maybe just before we wrap up, maybe give a quick overview, some maybe the lessons learned or some tips others could take away from this call.
Yeah, so we probably don't have anything like super insightful. So we did some stress tests of our system where we sort of hold back the volume and then we allow the volume to drop through our ERP, WMS. We man
Yeah,
up all the benches so we can assess how well the system is performing. And because each year we put more and more volume and transactions through our operational tech stack, the pressure is, with the bars getting raised every year. This
yeah,
time around, we noticed some slowness in certain parts of our process. And so making sure we rectify those, well, one, doing the stress test was great because we
yeah,
understand them. Two, making sure we fix them before, Black Friday, absolutely critical. And then make sure you bake in some extra capacity on your forecast because, okay, caught out. And yeah, make sure communication's just super clear between all the teams. Like we had the one or two slip ups we did have was just because of just like emails maybe not being super clear, which is very basic but necessary.
Necessary. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Customer comms can make or break
Cool.
that journey as well, for sure. Well, look, thank you so much for your time, John. Really appreciate it. Could chat to you all day. Very surprised how quickly that half an hour went.
No worries.
But thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to everybody else who joined us this morning as well. Hopefully, you found something of interest and some food for thought that you can take away. I think the team will be sending out the bulk case study so you can get a bit more familiar with some of the things that bulk have done over the last little while. And I think we've got a lovely new AI and social commerce report that we'll also send out afterwards. So, again, thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully, we'll see you on the next one. Thank you all.